All right, so we are going to begin in just a moment. I just need to open up one Word document over here. All right, so what we're going to do today is we are now going to begin our look at many issues in experimental psychology that are important to know about, that are important to be aware of, experimental psychology techniques and concepts that you will encounter in your future academic and professional pursuits in psychology, but they have been saved until now because they were not essential for writing our research report. So the last sort of conceptual idea thing that we needed to write the research report was that idea of the factorial research design, the interactions and the main effects, the idea of deducing hypotheses from theories and applying them to different situations. So now we have all the pieces in terms of the concepts in place. We will, next class, be going over what goes into your introduction, and we'll follow that up with another class later about every single little thing that you need, including all the way down to title page, abstract, and reference section, all those. But we are now at the point where you have the tools that you need in order to write the sections, so we can start covering some of the other issues that are important in experimental psychology that were not essential for the paper. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and we're going to specifically take a look at these single case experimental designs, because these are designs that you will most likely encounter, especially if you go into clinical work. So we're going to take a look at single case experiments and illustrate the need for single case experimental designs. We're going to take a look at the challenges that a single case experimental design encounters. And by single case, we mean very small numbers of subjects all the way down to just one subject. And then we'll take a look at those special experimental designs that are used to deal with the issues in a single case experimental design, including reversal design and a multiple baseline design. That's when you date a whole bunch of people at the same time. You got your multiple Bayline going. But anyways, we'll take a look at that, and then we'll end it, if we have time, with the beginning at the look of a video of Harry, a treatment of a self-injurious individual, a single case experiment in practice in psychology. All right, so single case experiments, these are also known as single subject designs, and they're also known as small n designs. So n is typically set aside to stand in for the number of subjects that you have in a experiment. So if you're doing an experiment and n equals 20, that means you have 20 subjects. Well, sometimes you don't have a lot of subjects. Sometimes you might have only 3 subjects or only 2 subjects. Or in the case of a single subject design, you might have only 1 subject. So these are special types of experiments, special experimental designs that are required to determine if your independent variable has an effect, if your independent variable is actually doing something when you're dealing with this very small number of subjects. And we're bringing this one up, and it could be important for many of you if you go into clinical psychology, because oftentimes these are the designs that help you determine whether a treatment has been successful for a single patient. So if you are treating an individual, which a lot of psychological treatments are, you're treating an individual, you have an individual client, in that case you might design a treatment specifically for them. And as a psychologist, you need to know whether that treatment is effective or if it's ineffective, in order to be able to ethically treat your patients. So in that case, we're going to have these single case experimental designs that we'll take a look at today. So they're often used in clinical trials, clinical interventions. They're also often used when subjects are rare. So if you're outside of clinical psychology, if you're in experimental psychology or in other areas of psychology, you might deal with rare subjects that just because of their characteristics don't occur very often. So this is the case with certain rare mental disorders. It's part of psychology. We want to understand these mental disorders. But if they occur in one in every million individuals, it might be hard to get a sample size of 100 for these individuals. You're basically looking at almost every single one in the United States population. It's going to be difficult to come by. So rare mental disorders, also rare mental traits, right? Looking on the positive side, sometimes you want to study people with really outstanding talents that make them incredibly unique. So one example of this is Stephen Wilshire. He's known as a human camera. And we'll take a look at a video of his capabilities. And, suffice it to say, he's incredibly unique. So let's take a look at exactly what he can do. And we will see if we can get ourselves some volume on this. One sec. It's coming. All right, does not look like we're going to be able to get any volume on this. So I will, in that case, give you the information that would be presented here. Other than that, we could go off of just the volume.
For this film, we're testing the living camera in
Can anybody hear this in the back?
Stephen has never seen the Eternal
Right, so
City.
let's all just be very quiet.
After only a 45-minute helicopter flight, we'll ask him to draw a 5.5-yard panoramic picture of the historic city centre. Without having a second glance at it, Stephen has 3 days.
Okay, so just because we've kind of missed the intro here, just very briefly. So Stephen has never seen Rome. He's never been there before. And what they're going to do is they're going to take him up in a helicopter, and he is going to get one helicopter ride around Rome. He's going to be up there for 40 minutes, taking a look at all of Rome. And then they're going to ask him to then draw Rome from memory and see exactly how he does.
In these 3 days, Stephen will have to keep the thousands of details in his head. The innumerable cupolas, the tiny winding streets, all the balconies and windows of the endless array of houses, and each and every column and window arch of Rome's major sites, from the Pantheon to St. Peter's to the Colosseum. 5.5 yards of paper can look scarily empty. The amazing thing, Stephen starts the drawing as we would, with the Church of St. Peter's. But he doesn't do any sketches, nor roughing out of the space for the drawing. It's as if the panorama already existed within his head, with all the proportions, all the roads, all the details. At the end of the second day, Stephen is a good halfway through his creation. After 3 days of his drawing marathon, even Stephen Wiltshire starts to tire. He has filled in more than 5 yards of paper in fine pencil. He has been restlessly aligning window to window and house to house, because Stephen loves to be applauded for his art. In the left corner, he's finally reached the ruins of the Forum Romanum. Stephen's sister Annette is rejoicing with him. He's made it. Obviously, he's pleased with his work.
All right, so that was Stephen Wilshire drawing this, and basically he had a 40-minute helicopter ride and then sat down and for 3 days drew this panorama of Rome from memory, just from what he remembers from that 40-minute trip. And what they did is they actually compared this to the actual map of Rome, just to make sure that he's not drawing something that looks like a city. And sure enough, all of these little roads were correct. And the number of windows and floors on these buildings was correct. And the view of the basilica and the amount of forest that you could see was correct from the vantage point of the helicopter, really indicating that he has this sort of imprint in his mind about what he saw, and he's not just building it off of regular facts. And in fact, there were very few errors. So the windows and columns on the Colosseum here, those were all correct. I think one of the few errors was these lines here shouldn't be vertical. They should be horizontal lines, so we got that incorrect. But basically all these little streets, all these little houses, everything drawn from memory after a 40-minute ride in a helicopter over Rome. So Stephen Wilshire is fascinating. If you're a memory researcher, here is this mystery of how does this man remember all of this information. And if you wanted to study Stephen Wilshire, you would need to use these single subject experimental designs, because you're not going to find many other individuals like him. You can't put out a call and expect 20 individuals with his memory abilities and his drawing abilities to show up at your door. There's probably not even 10 individuals like him in the world. So if you were a memory researcher and you're like, oh my gosh, this is fascinating, what an opportunity for psychology, you would at best have access to one individual. And you would have to use these single subject experimental designs to account for the fact that you're dealing with such a small number of subjects. All right, so you can use it when subjects are rare mental disorder, rare mental traits. You can use it when specifically trained subjects are also needed. So sometimes you just, you need experts. You need experts in a field. You need people with expertise in certain types of knowledge. So for example, if you're doing research in the psychology of art, oftentimes you will split your subjects into novice, everyday typical subjects, and art experts, really educated art experts. And you might not get a whole bunch of different art experts. Other ones include trained observers. So I remember when I was doing research on color vision when I was doing my postdoc in the University of Nevada, Reno, we needed trained observers to do a lot of this, the distinctions between the conditions in our color research, because we needed to ask them, well, which one of these are different on saturation? Which one of these is different in hue? Which one of these is different in brightness? And unless you can really keep those very clear in your mind, it might be difficult to get good data. So for instance, if we were running that here with the faculty that we have available here at IUSB, some of the color ones, especially when we were getting into more complicated, color spaces and things like that, we might only have one trained observer, whoever that guy is. You might only have the one trained observer that is able to participate in that experiment. And I know in our own experiments, when I was, again, doing my postdoc, we would publish research with three individuals, three subjects. And it would be me, it would be the supervisor, and it would be one of the other grad students. And I would publish with me, my supervisor, and one other grad student, and he would publish with himself, his supervisor, and me. So we would basically just trade hours in the lab as working as subjects, because again, we needed those trained observers. We just couldn't recruit from a introductory subject pool. All right, and then sometimes your subjects will be unique. So they're not just rare, they're literally one of a kind. And oftentimes that has to do with the fact that you're dealing with subjects with a unique history. And this often happens when you're dealing with clinical treatments. So if you're treating somebody for a mental disorder, if you're treating somebody for a mental illness, a lot of times that mental illness was produced via a unique history that person and that person alone experienced. And then you develop your treatment based on that unique history. You develop a treatment that will really work for this one person only. And that treatment, you can think of it as an experiment. You're literally testing, does this treatment work? Does this treatment have an effect? And because of that, you can think of it as a single case experiment. So we're going to take a look at an example of this. When we take a look at Harry, a self-injurious individual. So he is, you can see him here through a one-way mirror. He's an individual that literally smashes his fist into his face. He bites himself. He smashes his nose into his knee as a way of controlling other individuals. And they treat this behavioral disorder, but they do it in a way that was specifically designed for Harry. It was specifically designed because of Harry's history of using this type of self-abuse to control others. It was specifically designed for the fact that Harry loved to be in restraints. He found restraints highly reinforcing, another kind of unique feature. So they developed this treatment to treat Harry, and then once it's developed, they needed to test to make sure that it was actually what was causing Harry's decrease in injurious behavior. And we'll actually see footage from that treatment to take a look at how this is implemented in a real world setting. All right, so let's say, let's do a hypothetical first, and then we'll take a look at some of the real outputs. Let's say that you were dealing with panic attacks. Let's say that that was your area of expertise. That was what you treated. You treated individuals with panic attacks. And somebody came to you and wanted to be treated for panic attacks. And you decided to go with individual treatment. So you were going to design a treatment program specifically for them in order to treat their panic attacks. So what are some of the challenges that you would encounter? Well, if you're treating a single individual, you need to determine if that independent variable, that is, if your treatment has an effect on a small number of subjects, that is, that one subject that you're treating. So it's oftentimes used for just a single subject or a single patient. And let's say that you have that individual and they come in and they say that they suffer from panic attacks. One of the first things that you would do is you would assess how bad is this behavior, how much of this behavior is occurring. So oftentimes your first move when you treat an individual, as long as they're not a danger to themselves or to others, is you don't do anything. You basically have them track their level of behavior for maybe a week. So they suffer from panic attacks, you have them track things for a week, and then they come back and you know exactly how often they go through panic attacks and how severe those panic attacks are. Let's say that you then develop a treatment. You sit down with the client and you're like, okay, this is the treatment that we're going to do. Anytime you feel a panic attack coming on, what I want you to do is I want you to start breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, and I want you to count backwards from 20. Let's just say that that was the treatment that you came up with, a little cognitive behavioral therapy. So you teach them that treatment, then you send them away, and after a week they come back and you look at how often they had panic attacks for that week, and you see that the panic attacks are reduced. So the question is, can we from this conclude that our treatment was successful? Can we, based on this, say that our treatment was effective at reducing the panic attacks? And more importantly, that this individual should now continue to do this treatment in order to further reduce panic attacks in their lives. So how many think that this is sufficient evidence to indicate that our treatment was effective? How many think it's insufficient? All right, you're right, it is insufficient. And the reason that it's insufficient is because when we started up this treatment on this single individual, something else may have, just by chance, coincided with the beginning of that treatment, and that something else may be the actual thing that reduced the panic attacks. So what might happen in a person's life that could reduce panic attacks? They got their dream job and could quit their bad job. So they came to you, they were suffering from panic attacks. You said, all right, I want you to start counting backwards from 100 and breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth whenever you feel that panic attack occurring. And just by chance, on that same day, they quit. They found their dream job, so they quit their horrible job, and now their panic attacks are reduced. In that situation, you don't know if it was your treatment or the fact that they found that dream job that actually caused a decrease in the panic attacks. And that's an issue because you would want them to continue their treatment so that their panic attacks are reduced. But if your treatment is doing nothing, and it's the fact that they now landed their dream job, if you lead them to believe erroneously that the treatment is effective, then they're going to be blindsided when they have to change careers and they lose their dream job, and all of a sudden the panic attacks just come back and put them in risk of, again, going under that extreme behavior. So any other speculations about what might occur when you begin treatment that cause the panic attacks to be reduced? It would be pure speculation. All right, doesn't seem like anything is readily coming to mind. But maybe they met somebody. Maybe they met someone and that someone just has the ability to calm them down. Maybe they've been spending a lot of time with another individual and that individual recognizes the signs of panic attacks, and whenever they start having a panic attack, they're able to talk them, down from the attack. In which case, once again, your treatment does nothing, but it's this other person that they met that calmed them down. And again, we want them to be able to say at the end of our treatment time with them, look, continue to do this behavior, continue to do this treatment, and your panic attacks will be maintained at a low level. That will work if it's a treatment. But if it's the fact that they met someone and that someone calms them down, what happens when that someone moves away? What happens when that someone's no longer in their life? Panic attacks come back and they're back in your office. So it could be just maturation. It could be that they turned 21 and they said, you know what, I'm a fully legal alcohol drinking adult. Maybe it's the alcohol that started up. It could be that caused the panic attacks to be reduced. It could just be, it's possible sometimes just a mental effort, sometimes just a change in the way that they're thinking because of some huge life event. So maybe they had a near-death experience. They start the treatment and they go outside, they almost get run over by a car. And that near-death experience just has this profound effect and it shifts their entire mentality. It could be anything. Maybe they joined a fight club and that just helps them deal with their panic attacks. The point is that it could be absolutely anything. So something more plausible. Maybe they were being bullied at school. And that was the reason that they were feeling those panic attacks. And their bully just happened to move away. You start the treatment, they walk in on Monday, and it's like, oh, class, so-and-so had to move away. They're in another school. And maybe that's the reason the panic attacks were reduced. The bottom line is that something else could have happened. And if you, as a psychologist, mislead your patient into thinking that the treatment was effective, then you set them up for these panic attacks to come back in the future. As a psychologist, we're trying to fix these behavioral issues, and we need to know whether or not what we did was actually what was fixed, because we can control this. We can tell them, keep doing the treatment. If the treatment works, the panic attacks will be reduced. But the chances that something else happened is very high with a single individual. And if that something else is causing the panic attacks, then it would be unethical for us to say, oh yeah, keep doing the treatment. Treatment seems to be working. That's false hope. That's actually a lie. So we need techniques to make sure that we can account for that something else happened. So far, so good? Yep.
Isn't it kind of like protocol though, even if they do, like, say, meet something or start a club and get it under control, that they pair it with something else, whether it be medication or therapy?
Well, typically you would pair medication and therapy together, especially in the beginning stages, to get things kind of going. But at the same time, you still need to determine whether or not a treatment that you made is what's causing the change in behavior. Because again, whereas you can tell your patient, continue on with the treatment, you cannot control other things that happen in your patient's life. So if it's one of those other things that is causing the change in behavior, you need to be able to identify that it's not your treatment, that it is something else, and then you delve into their lives and you try to figure out what is it that is causing this desire for decrease, in this case, in the panic attacks. So again, the idea is that we need to know, is it the treatment? Because we want to make sure that we have actually helped this individual get rid of their panic attacks. So the final question is like, why is this only an issue with a small number of subjects? Why is this only an issue with, say, a single subject design, rather than, coming up in the previous experiments that we mentioned? So you'll notice that this is the first time we're talking about problems with experimental designs, but we're only bringing it up because of the small number of subjects in this case. And it just comes down to mathematics. It just comes down to probabilities. So let's just, for argument's sake, say that the probability that something else happened, and that is what caused the reduction in panic attacks, let's say that probability is 50%. Right? There's a 50% chance that it was your treatment. There's a 50% chance that something else happened. So if you were to tell this subject, this client, continue on with your treatment, you got a 50% chance that you've helped this individual, your treatment is actually effective, and you have a 50% chance that you have lied to this individual and your treatment did nothing, but it was that something else that happened. That's in a small subject design. So why is this not a problem in experiments with larger numbers of subjects? Well, if you're taking a look at a large number of subjects, you have subject number one over here. And in subject number one, let's say that their panic attacks reduced. Let's say that you are treating a whole bunch of subjects in a sample and you're using the same treatment, count backwards from 20, breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. And your first subject here, you have the same issue, right? Their panic attacks were reduced. Maybe it's the treatment, maybe something else happened. And for the second subject here, you have the same issue. Maybe it was a treatment, maybe something else happened. And for your third subject, same issue. Maybe it's a treatment, maybe something else happened. Same thing for your fourth subject, same thing for your fifth subject. Now, in each case, you have a 50% chance that something else happened. In each case, you have a 50% chance, just like you did here, that something else coincided with the beginning of treatment and caused this person's panic attacks to go down. Something else coincided with the beginning of treatment and caused this person's panic attacks to go down. Something coincided with the beginning of treatment, caused this person's panic attacks to go down. So that's a 50% chance that it happened for the first person. That's like flipping heads once. It's a 50% chance that it happened for the second person. That's like flipping heads 2 times in a row. 50% chance that it happened for the third person. That's like getting 3 heads in a row. For the fourth person, 4 heads in a row. For the fifth person, 5 heads in a row. The chance that it would happen to 5 distinct individuals is only 3.1%. So if you see that panic attacks are reduced in a sample of 5 subjects, you only have a 3% chance that something else happened to all of them. Whereas you might have a 50% chance that something else happened to a single individual. And this is only for 5 subjects. That's still a small number of subjects. If you increase it just to 10 subjects, that chance goes down to 0.1%. Just 1 in 1,000 chance that it's not your treatment, it's the actual something else happened. That's the chance that something else would happen to 10 individuals, 10 coin flips you have, and getting heads every single coin flip. So this is the reason why we haven't worried up until this point, because if you're dealing with 10 subjects, the chances that something else happened to each of them that makes it look like your treatment is working is only 1 in 1,000. You can live with those odds. The chances that something else happened for an individual could be as high as 50%. That's too high. That requires the need for these single subject designs. All right, any questions on that so far? Make sense? All right. So what do we do? How do we handle this? How do we make sure that it's the treatment or that it's something else? How do we determine which one of those is the actual case? Well, for that, we have two major designs that are used in these cases, the reversal design and the multiple baseline design. So we'll start off with the reversal design. And again, a reversal design, you use it for small numbers of subjects. And what you do is, this is a way to control for multiple explanations for changes in behavior. You are looking for the treatment. You're looking to make sure that it's just the treatment. So as we saw, there's a number of explanations that can cause behavior changes. There's a number of something else's. It could be things happening within the subject, like maturation or cognitive shifts. It could be something happening in the environment, like a dream job or a bully moves away. It could be anything that happens to this individual. So how do we combat that? We can combat that and get at the heart of whether it's a treatment using a reversal design. So in a reversal design, what you do is you start off with a baseline period. And during the baseline period, there's no treatment. So this is when the subject first comes to you and says, I'm having panic attacks, and you determine that it's not dangerous, and then you send them away for a week and you say, I want you to track how often and how long your panic attacks are. So you have an app on your phone, whatever it is, however they might track it. And every single time you have a panic attack, you enter in the data. And for that week, we're just wondering how bad is the behavior. Then when they come back, you start period B. You start the treatment period. And in the treatment period, that's where the treatment is instituted. That's where you say, all right, every single time you feel a panic attack coming on, what I want you to do is I want you to breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. I want you to count backwards from 20. So that's the treatment period. And that's what we basically have here. We have the baseline, and then we have the treatment period. What happens in the reversal design is then once the treatment period occurs, if the change that we're looking for has actually taken place, in this case, if panic attacks are reduced, we then go back to baseline. We then reverse the treatment, remove the treatment, and see what happens to the behavior. We remove the treatment and basically go back to baseline conditions. So this is what it would look like. We have our baseline condition where this individual is suffering from panic attacks. And we would say, all right, for this first week, just go about your daily business, record how many panic attacks that you have, and they might come back and we might say, oh, you have 0.8 panic attacks per day. Right? That's how often you have panic attacks, and they last for about 20 minutes apiece. So that is the level. That tells us the level of the behavior that we're trying to change. What we do then is we institute the treatment phase. So they come back and we say, all right, for week number 2, we now want you to do the treatment. And we want you to breathe in through your mouth, out through your nose. We want you to count backwards from 20 every single time you feel a panic attack coming on. And then record how often panic attacks have occurred. So that's the beginning of the treatment phase. The key here is that when we begin that treatment phase, something else might have occurred in their lives. Something else might have started when that treatment started that could be a potential cause for the change in behavior. So let's say that we're doing the treatment, and lo and behold, during that treatment, panic attacks are reduced. Panic attacks are reduced. We don't know, is it due to the treatment? We don't know, is it due to something else? It could be due to either of these situations. So what do we do as a clinician? We say we're going to use a reversal design. And they come back after week number 2, and we say, all right, it looks like your panic attacks are reduced. What I want you to do is now for this next week, don't do the techniques I showed you. No more counting backwards from 20, no breathing in through your mouth, out through your nose. We're going to remove the treatment and see what happens. And the assumption is that we stop the treatment, but that something else continues to occur, right? The dream job that they got continues to occur. The bully that moved away continues to be moved away, right? That something else that occurred continues to occur. And then we look at what happens when we remove the treatment. And if the panic attacks come back if they come back to the previous baseline levels, that means that it could not be, they were not reduced by that something else. It could not be this something else because the something else is still there, but the panic attacks came back. That means that it's the treatment that was causing the reduction in panic attacks. So if your behavior goes back to the baseline levels, that's an indication that it was your treatment that caused the reduction in panic attacks. On the other hand, if the panic attacks were reduced, and when you remove the treatment, the panic attacks remain reduced, right? So you tell them, don't count backwards from 20 anymore, don't breathe in through your mouth, out through your nose when you feel a panic attack coming, and they come back and their panic attacks are still reduced, then that's an indication that it's not the treatment. Because if the treatment caused the reduction, then when their treatment is gone, panic attacks should come back. That's an indication, if they remain reduced, that it's that something else that is causing this reduction in panic attacks. And if this pattern occurs, then you sit down with your client and you basically say, hey, do you remember when we started the treatment? Tell me about other things in your life that changed. Tell me about other stuff that might have happened. And you try to figure out, what is it? What is this something else that caused these panic attacks to be reduced? And then maybe you design your treatment program around that something else. All right, so any questions about the reversal design? Make sense? Okay. The other design that's very widely used, other than the reversal design, is called the multiple baseline design. And this is when a reversal design is either impossible or unethical. So sometimes there's just certain changes that are made that cannot be reversed. So we've encountered one of these already, Phineas Gage. When Phineas Gage had that behavioral change because that spike went through his jaw and into his brain, his behavior changed. You cannot reverse that treatment. You can't put that brain back in and see if his behavior goes back to previous levels. So sometimes a reversal design is impossible. Sometimes it's unethical. If the person is potentially a danger to themselves or a danger to others, you cannot, if you institute a treatment and their dangerous behavior decreases, you then cannot ethically say, well, let's reverse that treatment. Let's see if he becomes dangerous again, or if she becomes a threat to herself again. That would be unethical. However, you still need to know if it's your treatment that's being effective. So one thing that we can do in that case is we can use this multiple baseline design. So what we're going to see in the video is a multiple baseline across behaviors. You can also do it across situations, and you can also do it across individuals if you have maybe more than one individual, like 2 or 3. But we're going to see multiple baseline across behaviors. So we'll start with that. And this is when several different behaviors are measured, and you treat each of them after different baselines have expired. So this takes advantage of the fact that oftentimes people who are seeking clinical treatment oftentimes have more than just one issue, right? And that's true of anybody. I mean, if you ask somebody, do you have any bad habits? It would be very rare for the person to say, yes, I have one and only one bad habit. There's only one thing about myself that I would like to change, and if I did, I'd be perfect, right? Usually there's more than one thing that we would like to change about ourselves. And it's no different for people seeking professional help. Sometimes there's several different behaviors that can be treated. So what you would do in a multiple baseline design is you would treat those again at different baselines. So say this individual comes in and they say, you know what, I suffer from panic attacks. I really need help with my panic attacks. You as a clinician might notice that they have other behaviors that maybe need to be resolved as well. So they might be comorbid with OCD. They might have OCD at levels that haven't bothered them, but are still enough to be treated. Yep? No? Okay. And they might also suffer from agoraphobia, right? They might have a fear of just going outside. So you as a clinician might identify these 3 behaviors, and you might say, you know what, I want to design treatments for these 3 behaviors, and I'm going to use a multiple baseline design because I don't want to reverse treatment for any of these behaviors. So what you would do is you would start off with a baseline for all three behaviors. And you would say, all right, for this first week, go home, track how many panic attacks you have, track how many obsessive compulsive behaviors you do, and track how many times you feel fear leaving your house. So they come back after a week, and you have their baselines. What you do is then you institute treatment, stopping baseline for one of these behaviors, but not stopping baseline for the other ones. So you start treating the panic attacks, but you don't treat the OCD, you don't treat the agoraphobia, and you institute a treatment for the panic attacks and see what happens. And let's say that the panic attacks are reduced. What we're looking for in a multiple baseline design is we're looking for this treatment to affect only the behavior that we treated and not the other behaviors. Because the idea here is that if something else occurred, then we would have a chance that that something else would affect the panic attacks, and or it would affect the OCD, and or it would affect the agoraphobia. Because if a random something else occurs, then it would randomly affect one or more of these other behaviors. So if we start treating the panic attacks specifically and leave the other two alone, and then during that treatment period, the panic attacks are reduced, but those other behaviors are not reduced, those other behaviors maintain their levels, that is good evidence that it's our treatment that caused the panic attacks to be reduced. Because again, something else could be randomly applied to any of these three behaviors. So the fact that only the one that we were treating was the one that went down gives us good evidence that it's the treatment that caused those panic attacks to be reduced. And then what we do is we continue on with that treatment, because we're not doing a reversal design, we're not ever taking the treatment away. But then what we're going to do is we're going to start treating one of the other behaviors. So after the second baseline, so OCD was on a 2-week baseline. After the 2 weeks, you would say, all right, here's the treatment for obsessive compulsive disorder. This is what I want you to do for the obsessive compulsive disorder. And let's say that obsessive compulsive disorder is reduced. Once again, if something else happened here, it had a 50-50 shot of reducing the OCD. It had a 50-50 shot of reducing the agoraphobia. If the agoraphobia is maintained, but the OCD goes down, that again is good evidence that it's not something else. It's actually our treatment that is causing the change in that behavior. And again, that agoraphobia would have the last baseline, so we'd start the treatment right about there. So again, the idea is that if something else started up and that something else continued on, that something else could have affected the panic attacks, could have affected the OCD, could have affected the agoraphobia. So the fact that only the behavior that was being treated went down gives you about a 1 in 3 chance that it was your behavior. Sorry, it was your treatment that caused that reduction in behavior. Then you take the second something else, the something else. And if that something else started when that second round of treatments began, again, it could have affected OCD or it could have affected agoraphobia, 50-50 shot, multiply that with the 1 out of 3 shot, and you keep bringing down the probability that these something else's have occurred, and you keep increasing the probability that it in fact was your treatment. All right, so that's multiple baseline across behaviors. Any questions about the multiple baseline technique? All right. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to begin our preview of the Harry video. We got about just under half an hour left. So we'll get to the beginning of it. We'll watch part 2 next class. So this is going to be a demonstration of a single case reversal design, and what I like to call a sloppy multiple baseline across behavior design, and I'll mention that during the video. But this is treating a patient with self-injurious behavior, and if you want to watch this video, it is available on the Internet Archive, and that's the link there. It's in your slides. But what we're going to do right now is we are going to actually get some volume on this. So this is the video, Harry. It's a treatment of a self-injurious individual, and I will pause it occasionally to illustrate some of these single subject designs. And this volume better work. Oh, yeah, it works better when it's not muted. All right, so just in case you were distracted by my look at volumes, that's him biting himself. That is him slamming his fist into his head and into his leg. And that's Harry smashing his face into his knees.
Self-abusive behavior is not a pretty sight. As a psychologist, much of my work involves developing behaviorally based treatment and research programs to deal with such aberrant behaviors. In this film, you will see the use of one of these programs to treat Harry, the young man you just saw self-abusing. Harry is a 6'6" self-abusive man who resided in the Northern Virginia Training Center in Fairfax, Virginia.
All right, so he's 2 inches taller than I am. So you can imagine, he's a sizable individual.
Although Harry was only mildly retarded, he had been institutionalized for most of his 24 years because of his extreme self-abuse. Harry's self-abuse had begun when he was an infant. In fact, his mother recalls placing cardboard mailing tubes over his arms to prevent him from striking his face with his fists. As he grew older and stronger, his parents reluctantly institutionalized him so that he could receive treatment for his self-abuse. Harry's primary form of self-abuse was to smash his face, particularly his nose, with his fist or his knee. Over the years, these repeated blows had left his nose permanently disfigured. He also abused himself by biting, hitting his head and thighs with his fist, and picking at his skin until it bled. Unfortunately, none of the several institutions that had treated Harry were very successful in their attempts to eliminate his self-abuse. The only way they had found to manage Harry's self-abuse was to restrain his arms and sometimes to place a mask over his face.
You want to go restraint?
Yeah. All right. Over the years, Harry had worn a variety of restraints, including a straitjacket. Harry was wearing the arm restraints when the Northern Virginia Training Center asked me to develop a program to eliminate his self-abuse and the arm restraints. Everyone agreed that the restraints had to be eliminated because they reduced circulation in Harry's arms, called attention to him during trips into the community because of their bizarre appearance, and most importantly, because they appeared to be reinforcing for Harry.
That's right. I'm going to finish chewing before you take a drink. That's very nice manners. Very nice. That's it. No, please. No.
He was very calm when he wore the restraints and would become highly agitated when they were removed.
Now I'm eating without any restraints on.
It would be difficult for us to eliminate Harry's self-abuse and the restraints. There were several reasons why. First, Harry had a long history of using his self-abuse to control others so that they would place no demands on him. For example, he would begin self-abusing when he was asked to participate in an educational activity. Second, over the years, the restraints had acquired very powerful reinforcing qualities for Harry, such that he insisted on wearing them continuously. Finally, at 6'6", he used his size to intimidate people so that they were reluctant to treat his self-abuse, take away his restraints, or require him to participate in activities. Most of the time, Harry sat in the TV room, wearing his restraints and gazing into space. If he was asked a question, he would look downward and mumble something. If he was pressed, he would begin self-abusing.
All right, so those were the characteristics that they assessed for Harry. So he had a history of using his self-abuse to control others. He actually was reinforced by the wearing of his restraints. He preferred to be in restraints rather than out of restraints. And then lastly, he was 6'6", and he would use his size to intimidate others. So, and he's a self-abusive individual. You take all four of those characteristics, and it is highly unlikely that you are ever going to run into another individual that is like Harry. It's highly unlikely that somebody else is going to match all those characteristics. And as we're going to see, Dr. Fox is going to design a program specifically for Harry to take advantage of the fact that Harry finds his restraints reinforcing. And when he designs that treatment, it's designed specifically for Harry. He can't wait for 19 other subjects who are like Harry to show up at his door in order to run a full-fledged experiment. It has to be a small subject design. In this case, a single subject design.
In essence, Harry had become extremely non-compliant over the course of his institutionalization. As a result, Harry's non-compliance was an even greater problem than his self-abuse and his reliance on the restraints, since they were only the means by which he displayed his non-compliance and thereby controlled others. Even when Harry wore hinge restraints that allowed him to move his arms freely, he would not self-abuse unless he wished to escape an activity or a social interaction. Consequently, Harry was left alone except for 1/2 hour each day when he was required to shower and exercise his arms. Clearly, Harry was making no progress, educationally or socially, and in fact, he was slipping backwards. Our goal was to eliminate Harry's self-abuse and the restraints so that it would be possible to teach him the skills that might permit him to be placed in the community, such as in a group home. Perhaps the biggest obstacle was the reinforcing power of the restraints. With that in mind, we designed a program in which the restraints would be used to reinforce the absence of self-abuse. In other words, the restraints would be taken away from Harry, and he would have to earn them back by not self-abusing while he was out of those restraints. Now, this procedure had been used with success by Judy Fable at the Western Carolina Center. However, in addition to using the restraints as reinforcers, we also needed a negative consequence if Harry did self-abuse. We designed our treatment plan with 3 levels of negative consequences according to the least restrictive model of treatment. Our level 1 treatment program used a timeout procedure from restraints if Harry self-abused. If the timeout was unsuccessful, we would go to level 2, in which we would physically restrain Harry's entire body as a negative consequence. If that failed, our level 3 plan would consist of brief contingent electric shock delivered to Harry's arms for self-abusing.
All right, so that's the treatment program that Dr. Fox designed specifically for Harry. So this treatment program is that they are going to take away Harry's restraints, and Harry is going to have to perform certain behaviors without self-abusing to earn those restraints back, to get those restraints returned to Harry. And then if Harry does self-abuse, the first level of consequences is that they're going to remove the restraints for 5 minutes out of the room. Second level of consequence is that they're going to restrict his entire body from moving. Third level is they're going to apply brief contingent electric shocks to Harry's arms. So that's the treatment program. And that treatment program was designed specifically for Harry. That treatment program took advantage of the fact that Harry found his restraints to be reinforcing. So think about it for yourselves. You know, usually restraint is a punishment, right? So you take a look at police officers. You know, they might say, you know, if you don't calm down, if you continue to be unruly, I'm going to put you in handcuffs, right? Literally, I'm going to punish you with restraints. Not if, you know, ma'am, if you continue to be belligerent, I'm going to take those handcuffs off. So you better be good, because otherwise I'm going to take those handcuffs off. Nobody thinks of taking the restraints away as a punishment. However, for Harry it was. So they developed this treatment program specifically for Harry, and now they have to decide or determine, is it effective? Is it actually effective? If we see a decrease in self-abusive behavior, is it effective? Is it the treatment that's causing the change? In which case, they can then instruct the caregivers, they can instruct the parents, do this treatment with Harry and it will continue to work, versus if the treatment is not effective, they need to know that as well.
Because our treatment program contained these aversive consequences, and because Harry would be allowed to self-abuse during the program, we submitted a written proposal to the institution's Human Rights and Restricted Procedures Committee, to its superintendent, and to Harry's parents. At the committee's meeting, which Harry's mother attended, we showed a videotape of his self-abuse and his non-compliant behavior. After receiving everyone's approval, we submitted our program to the State Department of Mental Retardation. Having obtained their approval, we were ready to begin the treatment. We began by conducting 6 5-minute baseline sessions with Harry out of restraints. The sessions were kept brief because there were no consequences for self-abuse. In the baseline, we measured Harry's level of self-abuse across a variety of conditions.
Very good, everybody down. Very good.
Okay, so this is a baseline session. And what that is Harry is not being treated in this session. There's no consequences for self-abuse. There's no earning back the restraints or anything like that. This is just a baseline session. And what they're doing is they're recording how often Harry self-abuses. And this will be the level at which they're going to compare their treatment to. So this is Harry out of restraints, abusing at a certain level. And they're going to see if their treatment causes a reduction in the amount of abuse while Harry is out of restraints. But the only way to notice that reduction is to first see how bad or how severe the behavior is.
Very good, everybody. Very good, everybody. Sit down, Harry.
You're looking at Harry in a small treatment room through a one-way vision mirror. This room was selected because it gave us better control over Harry's behavior, reduced the possibility that someone might be injured, and permitted us to videotape the sessions in order to accurately measure Harry's self-abuse and to determine inter-observer reliability. Most importantly, the mirror permitted anyone to drop by and observe the program. Harry's extremely agitated behavior, brought about by the absence of restraints, makes it impossible to work with him on an academic task. Harry is not aggressing towards us. Rather, he is attempting to restrain his hands and arms in our clothing. We are trying to pry his hands loose as gently as possible and keep pushing him away from us so that he will be unable to restrain in our clothing. Harry was left alone so that we could determine how much he would self-abuse when we began using the timeout procedure during the treatment program.
5 minutes, last one, run another one. All right, let's keep going. Take about 10 seconds out. Start again. Everybody got that?
The voices in the background are from the observation room, where recorders are measuring Harry's self-abuse during 5-second intervals of time. Harry continues to self-abuse despite the fact that he is eating a meal. Thus, a powerful reinforcer such as food is not sufficient to distract him from hitting himself. Note that Harry is self-restraining with his left arm by wrapping it in his shirt. This was the first time he self-restrained. Unfortunately, we will see a lot more of this self-restraint in the future.
The brief baseline revealed that Harry had a high, stable rate of self-abuse across a variety of conditions. It also revealed that Harry's self-abuse, although quite severe, was not so dangerous so as to prevent us from proceeding with our treatment program.
Okay, so that observation right there. So they finished the baseline. He's got a high, stable rate of self-abuse. The second thing that they pointed out was that his self-abuse was not so dangerous that they could not allow him to self-abuse. The self-abuse was not so dangerous as to put himself in immediate danger. And as you can see, he didn't aggress against the other individuals. He tried to restrain themselves in their clothing, but he wasn't hitting them or doing anything like that. So they knew that they weren't in danger. So allowing Harry to self-abuse would not be dangerous for any party involved, or extremely dangerous for any party involved. And that allowed them to, number one, go through with their treatment. Number two, it allowed them to use a reversal design. So if they had determined that Harry's behavior was too dangerous to allow, it would be unethical for them to say, oh, let's remove the treatment and see if Harry's self-abuse goes back to baseline levels. They determined that while it needs to stop, it's not so dangerous that it would be permanently harmful. So they are then allowed to use a reversal design. Was the question?
Did they say why they tried to use food as a distraction?
They were just testing across a wide variety of situations. So one of the challenges in a treatment like this is you need to find something that's reinforcing. You need to find a reward that can be used to increase positive behaviors. And they, I think, wanted to test would food maybe be a potential reinforcer. And what they found was that clearly it wasn't. So you put Harry into restraints. Even if he was in hinged restraints where he could self-abuse, as long as he was in restraints, he wouldn't self-abuse. But even when he's eating a meal, he still would self-abuse. So it wasn't even enough to be eating food to distract him from that self-abuse. All right, so the baseline period is over, and let's see what is up next.
The design of our research and treatment program was to conduct this very brief baseline, then to implement the level 1 treatment, to return to baseline, and finally, the permanent implementation of the level 1 treatment program.
So what did he just describe there? That's the reversal design that he just described. So they started with a baseline. They were going to institute the level 1 treatment. Then they were going to follow it with a return to baseline. That would determine if it was the treatment that was effective in reducing Harry's behavior. And then if it was, then you permanently implement the treatment. If it was a treatment that's effective, then you basically tell the healthcare providers and the parents, look, put Harry under this treatment for the rest of his life. It'll decrease his self-abuse.
The initial baseline would allow us to measure the effectiveness of the treatment by comparing Harry's self-abuse during the baseline to his self-abuse during the treatment. And the return to baseline would establish scientifically that the treatment was causing the hoped-for decrease in Harry's self-abuse. The final return to treatment, of course, was where we wished to end up.
So that was a nice synopsis of the logic behind the reversal design.
The treatment began immediately following the final baseline session. Briefly, the program was as follows. We would select an activity that Harry could perform. Harry would be told as we removed his restraints that he could earn back his restraints following the activity. He was also told that if he hit himself at any time or refused to surrender the restraints, that we would leave the room with his restraints for 5 minutes. Our plan was to systematically increase the length of time that Harry spent out of restraints without self-abusing.
You understand? Now, as soon as we take the restraints off, I want you to...
All right, so this is treatment session 1. This is now when the treatment phase begins. So the baseline phase is done. Now they're actually implementing the treatment phase. The treatment is the consequences for self-abuse, the removing of the restraints out of the room, and the consequences for positive behavior, the earning back of restraints. That's the treatment, and they're going to implement it now during this treatment session.
Start counting to 100 now. You want us to walk out of the room with You want us to walk out of the room with your restraints? You want us to take them away? No. Then you be quiet while we hold them. We'll keep them in the room and you... got a deal. You can look out. Got a deal. Help me. Let's go. Yeah, all right. You have it. Now, when you're ready to calm down, I'll come in here and let you earn your restraint.
Counting to 100 was selected because we knew Harry could do it. He was not allowed to self-restrain by placing his arms in his pants. I required him to give me eye contact, be polite, and speak appropriately as a means of breaking down his non-compliant behavior and gaining instructional control over it. Furthermore, these behaviors are all socially appropriate ways of interacting with another person.
Take the restraint from him, and what do you say? Thank you. You're welcome, Harry. 80, 92. What do you say? Going to you. What do you say? Thank you. That's right. You're welcome. You're doing fine, but I want you to sit up when you count this next 100, and I'm going to give you your restraints back. Now, 1, 2, 0. Sit up. 1, 2, 0. Start counting. Sit up straight. 1, 2, 3.
Harry continues to test us by rolling over and clenching his hands together while he is counting.
Slowly. Sit up.
To counter this move, I required him to sit up and count. Requiring Harry to count slowly gained us more time with him out of restraints and was a further establishment of our instructional control. We were gratified because Harry was remaining out of restraints without hitting himself, and his counting earned the restraints indicated that they were indeed reinforcing, which meant we were on the right track.
98, 99, 100. All right, now what do you get? Restraint. How do you say it? I get out restraint. Please. Please. Yes, you may. I continue. Here, if you whip yourself and keep your strength, but take them away. You understand? Yeah. I help you. What do you say? I'm not going to help you here. You can put it on yourself. Start counting. 1, 2, sit up straight. And sit up here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, stand up and play some ball. Would you like to play some ball instead of count? Yes. All right. Now we're going to play some ball instead of count. We're not.
All right, so we're going to pause there. So at this point, we've seen all outcomes of the treatment contingency. We've seen that if Harry does the task that he is given without self-abusing, he gets his restraints back. If he self-abuses during that time, or if he refuses to do the task, they remove the restraints out of the room for 5 minutes. So that is the essence of the treatment program. And what we're going to do next time is we're going to pick it up from that point, and we're going to see, number one, if this treatment is actually effective. So will this treatment decrease the amount of self-abuse that Harry is doing? And then more importantly, is it actually the treatment that is effective, or has something else happened to Harry that day that actually causes that decrease in self-abuse? So we're going to take a look at that next time. Also, we're going to take a look at what goes into your introduction section, but that is all that I wanted to cover for today.